Okay, we're going to again look at where the structural family therapists examine generational boundaries. And we've talked about already where grandparents, extended family reside. One thing that you have to really be aware of in the whole process of even looking at this model is always taking the cultural dynamics. Always. Because here they're saying about where grandparents, extended family reside, if they are close geographically and are closely involved in the family, the council may include the grandparents in the session. That's fine. The council must enable parents to provide boundaries between them and their parents so that children know who is in charge, and grandparents and extended family do not undermine parental authority. I'd be very careful with that in terms of certain sort of cultural dynamics there in terms of certain families. Heads up, because I know with even some of the African American families, I know that the power in that family has to be the grandmother. And so therefore, you don't want in any form or fashion find yourself making statements what it might be that might be cast that grandmother in a negative light in terms of parenting, what it might be, because you might lose the whole family. And so always keeping the cultural dynamics in mind and looking at that part, generational boundaries. Now, structural family counselors might also use various techniques to intensify their session. Now, I don't do this myself, okay? I have to put a disclaimer here. I don't do this myself. But instead of striving for neutrality, the counselor might side with one parent to dramatize a point or to intensify the focus in a way that unbalanced family structure and makes change possible. Ironically, a counselor attempts always to maintain neutrality and understand and interpret both person's position may inadvertently support homeostasis and block change. Okay. But my question I pose many times is that can you, as a counselor doing couple counseling, any kind of counseling, maintain what you call neutrality? Think about it. Can you maintain neutrality? Because here Olson is saying a counselor who attempts always to maintain neutrality and understand and interpret both persons' position may inadvertently support homeostasis and block change. Intensification involves the therapist using several techniques to intensify an issue to help change occur and move the issue beyond polite discussion. In addition to in-session techniques, structural therapists use out-of-session tasks. I don't like the word homework, but Olson uses that to attempt to consolidate change into an unbalanced, counterproductive family structure. For example, if a counselor senses that a mother is over-involved in her 10-year-old son who is acting out in school, the counselor may assign the father the task of doing two special things to be negotiated in the session between father and son, with son each week for the next 4 weeks. In other words, the counselor would have a father contract to do some things with the son. The counselor urges the mother to treat herself to regular weekly time away from the home to pursue her favorite hobby. Finally, the couple is given the task of planning a weekend away from home without their son in 4 weeks. In other words, plan some time together without the son. With these assignments, the counselor has aimed at rebalancing an over or under responsible marriage, at the same time given a task aimed at revitalizing a marriage. Homework assignments are never given randomly, but are always aimed at creating new structural alignments in the family. And of course, a case example is on pages 59 through 60. Now, this again might sound simple, but it's very hard to do in terms of working with families or couples. It's a very difficult task, and so therefore, that's why I always tell you that you make certain that you're prayed up, you have the Word of God, and you have the Holy Spirit of God being the counselor, leading the counseling session here, because it's not an easy thing to do. But the next level we're looking at, a next contextual problem that might interfere with problem solving, we have to look at the interactional component. Now, interactional treatment planning, another likely cause of persistent difficulties with problem solving is interactional or communication problems. That interactional problems are a major cause of family pain is obvious, but what is not obvious is that interactional or communication solutions that families generate in an effort to solve the problems. And many times that is not obvious. Interactional communication solution that families generate in an effort to solve the problem can become the problem. For example, a wife is worried because her husband has not opened up more about his feelings following the death of his mother. The more she pushes and prods him to share his feelings, the more he shuts down. This reaction only convinces her that he must share his feelings, and she tries even harder to get him to open up, but he closes down even more. In this case, the attempted solution has become the problem, leaving both parties increasingly frustrated. The pursuer-distancer dance has increased the distance between them. These interactional styles maintain or exacerbate the problem at times, even becoming the problem. Treatment at this level involves developing a plan to disrupt the counterproductive interactional style of the couple or family. A primary goal is to teach the couple to meta-communicate, to communicate about the way they communicate. This goal is easy to describe, but again, difficult to accomplish. Most couples or families come to the therapy with a fairly straightforward goal: to change their children, their spouse, children, or parents. They have little or no self-focus. And keep that in mind. There are persons who are coming to counsel not for self-change, but for the change of the other person. As a result, a dance or style interaction forms around a particular topic or goal for the change, and conversation remains focused on content rather than process. These are two words that are very interesting words. Conversation remains focused on content rather than process. The couple or family becomes so involved in content and both defending one's own point of view and attacking the others that neither can see the pattern or dance of their communication. If they can step away from content, they can see how predictable their responses are to each other. And I always tell counselors to not get buried into content. Yes, you're going to pay attention to the stuff that's being said, yes. But you want to pay attention to how it is being said, how the statements are being made, more so than the amount of statements or issues that are coming up. So you want to not get so buried down in content, but pay attention to process, how it's said, not so much to what is said all the time. A couple's favorite fight usually starts for the same reason. Runs through the same argument and then ends in the same place. Rarely does anything change, and even more rarely does one spouse succeed in convincing the other of her or his point of view. In the same way, another lecture by parents seldom succeed in changing the child's study habit. Treatment involves helping the couple and family begin to clarify the patterns inherent in the way they communicate, helping them move away from the contents toward an understanding of process. If a couple can learn to meta-communicate and be attentive to process issues, their communication would greatly improve, and their ability to solve problems creatively should also improve. And that was interesting in terms of what a couple I talked about, in terms of every time the lady complained about every time she got ready to talk about serious issues, the husband started walking up the stairs and would ignore her. And the husband would say, well, every time I leave the room, I can be in there all day with her. She won't talk about serious issues. But every time I leave the room, going up the stairs, then she started talking about some serious things. And so therefore it irritates me, so I ignore. And so therefore it's a dance that they're in as such. And so therefore you're going to have to break that dance before you can even solve the problem that they're coming in with. And so therefore many times I've requested that the wife, would you mind, while your husband is in the room, to talk about the serious issues? And the husband would you mind staying in there listening to them? If by chance you been so used to this dance of this happening here, husband, that you find yourself going up the stairs, and wife, you find yourself talking about issues when your husband going upstairs, I would like for your husband to come back down into the room with your wife and talk about it. Would you help me out here? You know? And so therefore, many times they were pretty much agreeable to that, and the purpose is to let's break this dance here. Every person, everybody, not everyone, but some couples or some families have a certain dance they get into. And so as the dance becomes the problem, and when the dance becomes the problem, you can't really solve the actual problem. And so therefore, it's something you have to really be heads up on. The goal of learning to communicate about one's style of communication is not to prevent arguments or misunderstanding. It is to understand what went wrong in the process. And as one's skills become more sophisticated, to be able to recognize escalating interactions while they're happening so that one can modify them before the situation gets out of control. And this is an interesting dynamic to really pay attention to. When you see something beginning to escalate, you want to be able to initially intervene, because there's a level of escalation that a person might get at that no matter what you try to do, they're not going to listen to you or anything else. You know, they won't. And so therefore, you don't want them to get at that level as such where there's no listening, no cooperation, or no anything. Unfortunately, in one of the mental health agencies, the counselor, the therapist, down the hall from where I was, something happened where they allowed this conflict between daughter and father to get to a level of escalation. It was so high that they began to physically attack one another, and the therapist could not stop it. They had really just got into physical combat with one another, father and daughter, and the therapist had to run out and try to get some help in terms of their really stopping that as such. So therefore, you really want to be able to really recognize when interaction is escalating. So therefore, you can intervene at a certain level that you won't get at a level that you really will not be able to do much of anything. This goal may involve a psychoeducational approach to treatment. Most clients need some instruction to understand process issues and some tools to understand what takes place in a given interaction. One such tool is tracking. In this technique, the counselor asks the couples to reconstruct a major argument they have had recently. Now, I don't need to do that most of the time in my sessions. I've not had to do that in terms of the couple reconstructing a major argument that they recently had, because most of my couples end up within the counseling session in the arguments. And so therefore, I've not had to do that. But the counselor then helps them track their interactions. When they get them to do that in the process of the argument, they identify what sort of statement, comments, and responses intensify the interaction. With this technique, couples can often quickly identify counterproductive responses that escalate interactions and block effective communication. Examples of such responses are generalizations and counterattacks, which often go together. And you have an example on page 62. One must have discipline and understanding to refrain from counterattacking or overgeneralizing. Treatment helps couples do three things. One, identify through tracking the way interactions are blown out of proportion. Two, begin to identify through communication skills, training more appropriate response to keep discussion on target. And three, learn to recognize predictable trouble spots and patterns of interaction so that they can stop the dance before it gets out of control. And you can, case examples you can see on pages 64 and 63 and 64. So tracking is another one of the techniques, and I've never had to use that because the couples come in already going at one another. My feelings is that one of the things overall about family therapy itself or systemic work is that really you as a therapist, you as a counselor will find yourself being more active. More active. Listening is very important. Observing is very important. Nonverbal behavior. Listening is very important. But it's going to really take you to be more active in terms of certain things you might have to direct the couple's attention to, in terms of a statement that might end up escalating. It could be stated a certain way instead of that way. Okay, and so you're going to have to be a little bit more active as opposed to other types of therapies as such, especially individual therapies. And so therefore, we're going to move on to the cognitive treatment planning part here. And many couples have found to know what they should be working on, but find it difficult to sustain change. They know what they should be working on, but find it difficult to sustain change. They frequently are not aware of the power of their belief system to prevent change. And that's another dynamic that all of us need to have heads up on. They frequently are not aware of the power of their belief system to prevent change. Now, Beck, 1976, 1988, Ellis, and Geiger, 1977, and those in the cognitive psychotherapy field have shown the power of beliefs. Assessment often reveals that powerful belief systems can block structural change and interactional change. To be effective, counselors must find a way both to assess and to deal with these belief systems. If they are not transformed, change may not last. Now, one person, the thing that I make very clear to persons, all persons that I counsel, there are several things I make clear, but one of the things I tell them is that I cannot change you. I cannot transform you. The only thing that I can do is help you to try to make shifts in your relationships that would help each one of you feel more comfortable. Okay? The only one that can transform you or change you has to be Lord God Almighty, or Holy Spirit. Yeah. And so when you look at Romans 12th chapter, verse 1 and 2, talk about the transformed mind as such. That's something that only Lord God Almighty can do. When you use the word transform here, I say, well, only God can do the transformation or change. Okay? But you can do the shifting, help them to shift in certain ways. Again, two techniques are best to assess and transform these belief systems: enactment and tracking. Belief systems would not emerge by themselves. The counsel must take an active role in counterproductive belief systems. The technique of enactment, and we talked about that earlier, encourages a couple or family to talk to each other about the problem and pushes them to act out the problem in the room. Now, one of the most important thing that you want to do is let's pay attention to how they are communicating. You're looking at process, okay, not content. You're paying attention to how they're communicating. You're not listening to a whole lot of stuff they're saying about one another, okay? And then when you look at how they communicate to one another, then it'll give you a better sense in terms of what you need to do here. Here, even in the process, looking at process, you might find that as the husband is saying something to the wife, and the wife reacts, but you might have to tell the wife, did you really hear what the husband said? Or likewise with the wife, the husband, did you hear what your wife said? You might have come in and really come in at that time and say, did you actually hear what your wife, or did you actually hear what your husband said? That's very important to do that. and have them to give feedback to you on that as such. By doing that, you are helping them to see how they are almost getting into a dance here. You know, you're helping them to kind of start to see how they are interacting here. There is enactment that's taking place even in that little deal what they're doing there, and so you want to come in and say, "Did you hear?" And that's why when you had mentioned Eric about what you had done, that's a good technique in terms of that. In terms of, did you really hear what your husband said, to hear what your wife said? And so that's very important. As the counselor slowly intensifies the process, he or she begins to see not only structural difficulties, you know what those are, and interactional difficulties, but cognitive problems. The counselor must be careful not to become the family switchboard or encourage people to talk to her or him instead of to each other. See, and that's very important. You must, if you see the person just talking to you about that other person, then you want them to talk to one another. You direct them to talk to your husband, talk to your wife. Okay? That's very important. You don't want to become the switchboard for them as such. And so it said, encourage people to talk to her or him instead of to each other. Encouraging people to talk to each other. If this happened, enactment would not reveal the true interactional pattern or belief system. But the thing that we need to put it this way. In other words, if you get the people to talk to one another instead of they're talking to you, you will be able to get an understanding of that person's belief system. You will. You will. It's kind of like, yes, like all women, when you start to talk to them about things, they get hysterical. All women are just hysterical. Or men, are not, they're rational. Men don't get emotional. Men are rational, whereas women are emotional. They get hysterical. And now you hear certain people, men saying statements about the women, other women, these kinds of statements, then that's telling you that some beliefs are coming out here that you need to have heads up about, and kind of the cognitive part here. And these can be counterproductive to that relationship in terms of how they feel. Now, it's kind of like one person is always telling the woman that I'm the man. Well, she's kind of, waves it off as such. Because she said, well, I'm not even bothered with that, and just waves it off. But it can eventually create some problems in terms of where did that come from, in terms of that, It's obvious from your physical, biological, what it might be that you're male, but what are you talking about in terms of I'm the man, and so those kinds of statements that you hear can really give you an idea in terms of the belief systems that can create some problems. Now, a second way to uncover and change counterproductive belief system is through tracking. Tracking is used with couples to help them reconstruct arguments, again, which I don't have to do, that occur between sessions and trace who says what, the different types of response and factors that led to the escalation and misunderstanding. Working with couples to track their interactions, counselors frequently find responses seem grossly out of proportion to what was said. This disparity becomes an opportunity to explore what was heard and what belief system it triggered. And you'll see an example on page 65 and 66, where the counsel uses tracking or enactment to get the underlying belief systems. And the initial objective is to help the couple recognize and clearly articulate understanding belief systems. The next step is to help couples, family change counterproductive belief systems. This step is difficult because these beliefs are usually well-rooted as part of the way the person views the world and relationships. Now, I could not and would not myself bother with the lady this here, a deaconess in a church, elderly lady, And when she told her husband to shut up, men are not supposed to cry, I was not going to bother with that. I left it alone. And of course, the husband, tears dried up real fast, but he was crying because of the persons acknowledging him for his service. He was a man who had fought in many battles, Korea, Vietnam, wounded, everything else. And just the church recognizing his contribution service to the church and preparing great dishes and food for the church on different special occasions, surprising him with a recognition of that, brought tears to his eyes. But the wife very loudly told him to shut up. Men are not supposed to cry. And he stopped. And I wasn't about to bother with that. But you know that came from someplace in terms of certain belief system. From someplace. And you know at this time, at this period in time, he was not going to change that person's belief system there. You were not going to. Not at all. A common technique for changing, which Olson said, belief system once they have been identified, is to ask the person what are the odds that the belief is true. And that the person can imagine any other ways of looking at the situation. Now, nobody would have questioned this woman about what are the odds that belief that you just said is true. Nobody was going to do that. But there are some situations in a counseling session where you might want to bring up that question. What are the odds of what you just said that this is true? Are there other ways of looking at it? And you want to do it in a nice, courteous, respectful way. Next, the counseling couple can brainstorm about other ways of seeing the situation. Using this technique, again, they talk about Ted and Alice saw a number of alternate ways of understanding each other's behaviors and responses. They smile sheepishly as they realize how they have jumped to conclusions about the other and turned the situation into a catastrophe. Ted might have been saying that, well, I don't talk to Alice about things because she gets hysterical. Like all women. They just get hysterical. Of course, Alice probably was saying, well, for goodness sakes, as usual, he's not interested in what I do. He's always into his own stuff as such. And these kinds of dynamics that started coming up, you want to really say heads up and kind of ask them to kind of examine it and take a look at it and see what other options you can look at in terms of what's going on here. Although it may be easy with hindsight to recognize belief system and their effects, couples and families usually have long-standing beliefs about one another that are difficult to change. Sometimes they're not going to change, period. That's just it. That's just all to it. Persons can easily find evidence to confirm beliefs such as she really doesn't appreciate me, his career is more important than me, he really doesn't like me, if I share what I really feel, I will surely get hurt. If I get angry at him, he will leave. These are a few of the beliefs that counselors commonly hear their clients describe. But they are hard to change, and the longer they are left unexamined, the more entrenched they become. Belief systems do not change simply by talking about them. And yes, I've heard many persons say that if I get angry at him or I get angry at her, they will leave me. I'm afraid that they will leave me. And there are situations where persons have stormed out of the house, slammed the door, got in the car, and just went and stayed away for a long time. There are situations where persons have gotten upset, the husband has gotten upset, headed out house, and did not return home for about 2 days. And of course, the wife is hysterical in terms of that. In terms of husband, definitely is leaving me, going to leave me, has left me. And the death about word about where is he? Is he called in the emergency rooms? What it might be, And so these kinds of fears sometimes of saying or getting angry, what it might be, might definitely be a cognitive belief system that they might have to examine. Behavioral contract is one way to help change belief system. It attempts to use behavioral problem-solving strategies to challenge belief system. The counselor helps couples identify their key problematic beliefs and then specify what each partner could do to prove the other's beliefs wrong. Now, you have to be very careful with that one. Have to be very careful with that one. That can be and create some problems. What they could do to prove the other's beliefs wrong. You're going to have to probably frame it in a certain way here, okay? Because that can create some problems here. This technique usually takes some degree of problem from a counselor because couples tend to talk in generalities. And you'll see an example on page 66 and 67. Yes, couples generally do, and people generally do, talk in general terms. And many times you might ask them that I don't quite understand what you're saying here. Would you mind helping me to understand what you're saying? It's always good to do that. So then help me to understand what you're saying, because I don't quite understand it. Because people do sometimes speak in general terms, Now we come to the family of origin treatment planning. Now, as we see, we're going down from problem solving and going through interactional, structural, going through cognitive, going to family of origin treatment planning. As you go down to each level, in all honesty, you are really going into the area of long-term counseling. You really are. You really are. Where it's going to take more sessions, more time. All this stuff, even one dynamic, the cognitive or interact, could take long-term. And so therefore, persons who are in the ministry, pastors, what it might be, that have other pastoral care duties to do, must understand that you don't want to get into the long-term counseling. So you must have a counselor on board to do that, or refer the person to someone who can. And that's very important to be able to do that. Now, dealing with belief systems. Now, one of the things that's interesting here, almost as a sideline here, if I had paid attention to how the Spirit of God was trying to communicate something to me, it would have been short-term. It would have been short-term couple counseling. Now, of course, a crisis situation would have come about, but it would have been short-term. But I chose not to really pay attention to how God was leading me in terms of this couple, because what was being brought to me was this couple need to do a contract. And since I don't do a lot of contracts, it was something that I would not do. And finally, I really obeyed the Spirit of God and had them do a contract in terms of how they're going to work to keep their marriage together, signing their names and signatures and everything else, and my signing as a witness, and all of a sudden, boom, the lady became incapacitated. But when I had her come in, she said that, well, I really have no intentions of remaining married to this man, and I definitely am going to divorce him. But if I had not done that contract, I would have been still doing some counseling here, okay? But when I finally had him do that contract, then that's when everything came out. The guy got into a crisis as such as a result of that, but I was able to work with him short term, and things worked out okay. And so therefore, there are persons who come into, as you know, the counseling sessions, couples or families, and there's somebody who have some agendas there that you're not aware of. Agendas there that you're not aware of at all. No matter how skillful you are in observing and listening and what it might be. And that's why you have to have the Holy Spirit of God, identifying some things to you, bringing some things to your knowing the agendas, knowing the hearts and minds of people. The Spirit of God coming and telling you there, giving you a tap on the back, the shoulder, and letting you know some things. And so it's very important to be attuned to how the Spirit of God is communicating to you in terms of what's going on in that room, in that session. Very important. Heads up. Very important. Now, we come to family of origin treatment planning. Now, that's the next one. Dealing with belief system, particularly those with distort couple and family interactions, frequently leads to family of origin issues, treatment of which is an essential part of treatment planning in an integrative model. In the integrative model we're talking about. Many couples or families who have wrestled with attempting to change belief system become discouraged. It is hard to change the way a person's belief system. It's very hard to do that. Attempting to change these beliefs often leads the counselor to probe the origin of these beliefs, which is essentially in one's family, though many feel discouraged at this point. The fact that they have reached this point is evidence of progress. Well, yes, the fact that they have reached this point in terms of dealing with family of origin treatment planning, it's said they state in counseling, yes, but it ends up being long-term counseling with them. Okay? But they have remained, at least have not dropped out. But now there are situations where you have people, in all honesty, who will actually pull out of counseling. Who would actually drop out of counseling. They might even drop out just after the problem-solving level. Might drop out. One person dropped out of counseling. Well, they weren't going to go through it with anyway, because the lady who was married to the minister here had been told by their minister, their pastor, to divorce him. And so the lady had already made up her mind, which her husband is always saying she's always doing what the pastor tells her to do. The lady has already made up her mind that she was going to divorce him. And so she said, hey, nope, this is just useless in terms of my coming here because I'm going to divorce him. And that's what she did. So there was no more sessions. I did get some big feedback from the husband. Indeed, she did follow through with the divorce. And indeed, he was very unhappy with the pastor for influencing his wife, telling his wife to divorce him. And so, therefore, he found himself going to another church. Now, many couples or families who have wrestled with it, with belief system, of course, become discouraged. Attempt to change these belief systems often leads the counselor to probe the origin. We talked about that already. It represents tremendous growth that you've come to this level. It represents tremendous growth in terms of self-focus. Instead of blaming one spouse for one's feelings or attempting to prove that one spouse or family member is a problem, the person acknowledges that he or she has some belief systems that are both problematic and difficult to change when you come to this level. Recognizing the problem as well as one's contribution to the problem, or at least part of it, is a large, important step. That's an important step in any counseling situation. If the person recognizes, hey, I need some help, I got a problem. If they come to recognize that, yes, hey, it's something that I am doing here that I need to change to make things better. When you hear that, that's a good sign. That's a good sign. But when you hear the person says, not me, like one guy told me in terms of his wife that was determined to divorce him. Why? Because she definitely committed her life to Christ. She was tired of his coming into the room and cutting off the television that she had a Christian channel on, and he would come in and cut it off and turn it to some animal channel. She was tired of him. No matter what church she would suggest for him to go with her, he would always find something wrong with it. She was tired of his alcohol consumption, his destructive behaviors on a motorcycle while drunk, and cigar smoking. She was just tired of all those things. And she had come in, told him that if he doesn't come in for counseling, she was going to divorce him, which is very unusual deal for this lady. But he sat there in a counseling session and told the lady and myself that I am not about to change. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm going to continue to smoke my whiskey. I'm going to continue to ride my motorbikes. I'm going to continue to do what might be, and you can't do a thing about it. So I said, well, I can't do anything about it, but I know someone who can. Yeah. And so I just asked the lady, I said, do you want to remain in counseling? She said, yes. And so she stayed in counseling with me. And she made some changes. And by her making changes, she ended up making some changes in the relationship. And she ended up not divorcing him, staying married to him. But the changes she made in herself, and the changes I know that God helped her to make, ended up impacting that husband. And so therefore, many times, God said, well, you might have somebody who's saying that they're not going to do something, they're not going to work with you, but hey, but if you have someone in that relationship who's saying that I will, I want to, then you work with that person who wants to. By doing that, you might find yourself, with the help of the Holy Spirit, that person that wasn't cooperating end up changing, or making a change of heart in terms of the way that they've been behaving. But that was an interesting dynamic. When he was saying that, I must say that I was kind of nervous about asking her whether she wanted to remain in the counseling. I was nervous about that because, honestly, I didn't want to show any sort of disrespect for him as a husband. I didn't, but I was just something that I just had to just offer her that opportunity to really stay in what you want to. So it's something to think about. But once person recognizes that they do have a problem, it does contribute to a problem in a relationship, that's a very important step. Many people are unaware of the power that early childhood experience have to shape belief systems in the way one views the world. And many times we are not aware of that. It took some time for me to even become aware of that. Dysfunctional families, alcoholic families, abusive families, other types of destructive families leave especially powerful imprints on the psyches of their children. From these experiences, one form a set of belief that becomes a cognitive filter through which one views the world and close relationship in particular. These beliefs can relate to many themes, including how to handle anger, how or whether to express emotion, how to be intimate, whether to trust people, and how vulnerable one can be. These beliefs have the power to destroy what one sees in present relationships. And many times, these sort of things that we have experienced in our early childhood that we're not aware of, or we might be aware of, but they might come in and play a big part in terms of how we handle our emotions, how we trust and not trust people. So it's something to really have heads up about. And dealing with family of origin issues and integrated treatment, a logical starting point is the origin of specific belief system. The counselor's main initial role is exploration, which often begins with the construction of a genogram. And a genogram is nothing but a little map of the family, really. It's just a little square that represents the father and the mother, what it might be. It's just a little map, a family map. McGoldrick and Gerson describe the process of making a genogram using square for males and circles for females, and using different symbols to describe relationship between people. Constructing a map of the client's family helps the client talk more comfortably about her or his experience growing up. It helps both counselor and client see 3 or 4 generational patterns in the family. Now, this is something that they don't tell you sometimes. Now, Monica McGoldrick, and I do have a video even on how she works in terms of using a genogram. But Olsen is not telling you this, that even in using a genogram, you have to be very careful in using a genogram. And Monica, in using a genogram at the initial start a therapy with this family. It was the wife, the husband was a lawyer, his second marriage, a teenage daughter was a problem, presenting problem. When they came into the counseling session, Monica, who's a family of origin therapist, using genograms, started to asking questions and started to write in her little figures, little blocks, so forth and so on. And the husband said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Well, she said, I'm mapping the family because this is going to give me a sense in terms of what's going on with the family and so forth and so on." And he became very upset with that. He said, "Now look, I'm a corporate lawyer, and I believe in certain things being a certain way. And I just feel that what you're doing right here is just a waste of time. You know, as far as I'm concerned, I really feel that the counselor should stop right now." You know, and Monica is saying, "Well, you might not see how important it is now, but if you give me an opportunity, you'll see how things come together later on." And he said, "No," he said, "I really don't want to be wasting my time with these little circles and squares that you're doing and so forth and so on, asking about my mom and my dad, my siblings, my grandmother, grandfather, great-grandmother, grandfather. No way." And the only way that he stayed there was the wife told him, "Let's give it a try. Let's see what happens." And Monica said, "Well, yeah, if after a few sessions here and you really feel that you're still not happy with it, then, that's fine." But as they progressed through this map genogram and started mapping out some things, then he began to see what was going on in his relationship with his daughter that was having a problem. He began to see how the family of origin stuff was impacting. He began to see it. And so therefore they went through the process. And in all honesty, the thing that came up is that they had not grieved, the husband nor the daughter, nor his 17, 18-year-old son who was in college. They had not gone through the grieving process of losing the mother, because this was stepmother. And so they had not even gone through the grieving process. And so with that genogram, using this genogram, even the death of the mother, whatever it might be, that came up. And when they started dealing with the grieving issue, and then that's when they were able to start working through some things. And so the only thing I say is heads up is that there are some persons who might become, when you start doing that, and you might run across some resistance if you are a person who uses genograms. Now, reading some of the books and literature on adult children of alcoholics and adult children of destructive families can help clients understand their families and provide reassurance that their feelings are normal. There are some persons who've had such bad relationships, such bad experiences, that they really feel that they are the only ones who've gone through this. They feel they're the only ones that have gone through something of this nature. Only when they come to the realization that there are other persons who walk the same road that you've walked, gone through the same thing you've gone through, where they began to really see that, hey, no, I'm not, this is the normal thing to feel here in terms of this. Through reading and through exploration of their family background, clients can begin to understand the dynamics of their families in regard to parenting skills, structure or lack of it, and family rules, in addition to what they learn about conflict, intimacy, and expectations of marriages and family. One of the things in the process of my reflecting back in a time when I was coming up, one of the things that was very prevalent at that time is that with a lot of our families is that the persons were given authority to give us a swap. Okay? Teachers, community folks, church folks, whatever it might be, and we acted up, they were really given that deal to do that, and then when we got home, we didn't even get more. And so I remember that very vividly in terms of the sort of feeling that I had since I was one who was getting the board quite a bit. I really, especially the different teachers and so forth and so on, and for some reason in my mind that wasn't good, especially since people call themselves Christians. But train up a child, spare the rod, spoil a child. But it turned into, as a child, I thought it was pretty bad news. But one of the things that I always resolved in my mind, as a result of that, really, is that I would never lay my hand on my children. But that was for my sort of deal. I would never do that. Now, my wife had a different philosophy, but I didn't. I did not. As a matter of fact, I'm one of the persons who I just don't believe, don't want to ever find myself hurting or hitting anybody physically. I'd be devastated if I had to do something of that nature. I would, So both of my girls are now adults and what it might be. But when Dad tells you, when you ask him to do something, when I ask Dad for permission to do something, and he gives me an answer, that means that answer that he's given me, I must take it. I must not start asking over and over, because we know that if we continue to try to get Dad, manipulate Dad, that Dad would say, "Well, you've just lost it now." Okay. They knew that about me, but from the past experience of the whipping, the beatings, or what it might be, that's something that I really definitely no. And intimacy issues also come up too, in terms of from family of origins. Also, something that you need to reflect on and think about. Also, there are situations where in certain families you don't hug. Period. And there are some persons that had a hard time really allowing people to give them a hug. That was something that was not didn't happen with Mom or Dad or the family as such. Whereas there were other families that you always hugged and everything else. And so in a process of really interacting with people per se, in your congregation, what it might be, there are a whole host of different kinds of experiences that persons have had from early childhood. And many times, most of the time, you're not aware of those issues, okay? And so, therefore, it does take God's Spirit working in you to alert you to certain things. It does. I've had many situations where a parent has come to me or a young person has come to me, and the pastor was innocent. The pastor was pastor, but they felt very uncomfortable when that pastor hugged them. They were very uncomfortable. They would say, "I just didn't like the way that pastor, hugged me. I did not like the way that pastor touched me." Some people used to constantly complain about even some of the associate ministers, how they would hug what might be the young ladies. Again, heads up, you must be aware of the fact that, there are persons who come from certain situations, that you might see it okay, but you have to see how God put upon your heart to do certain things, because we don't know that person's history as such. Understanding family backgrounds can be a key to help clients better understand what they have brought to their marriages in terms of conscious belief system, which are more easily assessed, and unconscious expectations that obviously are more difficult to elucidate. So this can get awfully deep in terms of dealing with some things in family of origin things. Exploring their belief systems in family of origin material often help couples see the types of unconscious contracts they brought into marriage and how these non-verbalized contracts may affect belief systems and communication. Persons do come into certain marriages with certain sort of things that they are not conscious of in terms of their expectation of what the husband should be doing, expectation of what the wife ought to be doing. And if those things don't happen, then they might live their lives in quiet desperation in terms of that situation. And so therefore, heads up on that. There are a lot of, the last part we want to look at is individual developmental issues. That's the final level, treatment level here. It is the most difficult to do in the context of marriage and family therapists to work on individual developmental issues. It is. And working with family of origin issues, counselors sometimes begin to see deeper underlying issues that must be resolved in order for the couple or family issues to progress. And so, therefore, this is a very difficult thing to do here. Those of you who have more time, just read through this on individual developmental issues. But I've found that one of the difficulties that I would run across is that when you start doing individual work, one person might want you to tell them what happened in the therapy session with the husband or the wife. And of course, that's not a good idea to be doing that, okay? And so, therefore, you as that therapist are going to have to work out a system in terms of where when you start doing the individual work that you won't find yourself run across that as such. There are some people who take therapy sessions with the person, individual work, and they give it to the spouse or one of the spouses to say, you can share this with your other spouse. It's up for you to do it. Now, some people do that. I don't do that, but some persons do. But at this level here, there are some interesting dynamics that do come about. But I'm going to stop here. That's basically the whole overall general picture of the integrative model in terms of assessment and in terms of treatment.